and welcome everyone. I am Dr. Raquel Holmes. I am the founder of the Improv Science Freedom Festival. Welcome. Yay, Freedom Festival, 16 days of celebration. For those who have been here both this year and in years previous, welcome. For those who are new, I'm happy to give you a brief introduction to the Freedom Festival. The Freedom Festival was created, and I like to say this because it's true, from the heart of science. And what I mean by that is scientists who continue to engage in the world as ordinary citizens, finding independent means and platforms to bring people together and share things that they care about and care about in the world. And so the festival is part of a desire to, through celebration, through conversation, through play, explore freedom and independence. So it's part of and in response to the creation of Juneteenth as a national holiday. And the question that we're engaging is what does it mean for us to celebrate freedom from Juneteenth, the beginning of June 19th through July 4th? Opal Lee, who championed it becoming a national holiday, said, if we could all celebrate in that time and come together, we could create some amazing things. And so the festival is that invitation for individuals to share what they care about, what they think about in terms of freedom and independence, and invite others to do it with them. This is one of 22 events taking place in these 16 days. We hope you will check out freedomfestivalusa.org, where you can see the remaining sessions, which include explorations of artificial intelligence, also a conversation with Hakeem Oluseyi of the Astronomical Society of Physics, and an exploration of philosophy. And oh my goodness, there's too many to say, because what I'm really excited about is that you're here today for this session, which is solar punk and rural education, creating conversation, which has been organized by Laura Peticolas and Hannah Hellman at Sonoma State, the EdEon Center. Thank you so much for inviting us to hear what you think about freedom and independence. And everyone can throw up an emoji of some kind in saying thank you and welcome to Hannah and Laura for hosting this session. So go ahead. And emojis are down at the bottom of um, your Zoom with the react, and you could do an applause that says welcome, or a thumb, a rockets, exactly. Anything. Yep, I got to see some applause as we're about to hear from Laura and Hannah. Thank you, EdEon, indeed. Laura, Hannah, over to you.
Thank you so much, Raquel. It's such a joy to be here, and for you to open space for us to talk about some of the things that we're very passionate about. I'm gonna have Hannah start, but maybe I'll just say we'll do a quick introduction. My name is Laura Peticolas. I am a co-director here at EdEon, and we'll be taking over leading our EdEon STEM learning group in August as the director. And part of this discussion today really resonates with the vision I have for this organization, and where we're headed in the future, I hope. But to be fair to Hannah, and she will introduce herself, this was a vision I had, but I had no words for it and no context for it. And then Hannah introduced me to this amazing literary genre, which she will kind of tell us a little bit more about. So I'm going to hand it over to Hannah to introduce herself and then to start us off.
Thank you, Laura. Yeah, we very regularly talk about that future that Laura was just talking about. And, one day after I had gone on a binge myself of just solar punk stuff, I was like, have you heard of solar punk? It sounds like something you might like. So, and here we are now. So I have a master's in English literature. I also kind of just love all things solar punk. I've hung out on the subreddit for a long time, and all of the narratives, all of the themes, we'll talk about definitions here in just a moment, but all of these things really resonate with what I too want to see, in the future. And so to be able to talk about that in correlation with education, that which Laura and I do, which has been a focus of Laura for pretty much her entire career, is extremely exciting, and I feel quite privileged. Um, so I'm going to start with just a really quick scene setting, a who and a what and a why, kind of, if you will. This is something I kind of threw together when we began planning this. So this is imagine for a moment. Imagine for a moment that you live in a small farming community in rural California. Your community has a long history of growing the food that people from all over the world eat, and lately there have been more and more advances in environmental equity. For you, the farmer, this means that the sensors that you use, the seeds from which you grow your crops, the tools and equipment that you maintain, and all technology available to you are all ethically and equitably produced and sourced. The development of sustainable technology, like what you use to grow the food that feeds the world, is made possible by advances in green energy. This is energy like wind, solar, even fusion. Your job as a farmer in our solar punk world is to support and enrich both land and people. Here we go into the definitions. What is punk? So we hear about solar punk, we hear about cyberpunk, we've heard about steampunk. Punk, as defined by Monica Sklar in a book, Punk Style, is a vital new way to perform subcultural ideas, which incorporated its own art, music, dress, and lifestyles. And then I took this definition of solar punk specifically off of Reddit. Thank you to the user ALXD.org. They have some pretty phenomenal stuff, and they work very hard for solar punk. They say the best indicator of whether a narrative is solar punk is a simple question. Can it portray Wikipedia as a project? Not necessarily a means to fight the system, not a tool for manipulation of the masses, but as a great civilizational project. To me, and you'll see a lot of art in this presentation because a lot of what really captures solar punk the best is found in the art. And I have links here for the artists, and we can talk about sharing slides and all that stuff later. So solar punk, in my opinion, is about resilience. It is about sustainability. It is about equity. But most importantly, I think it's about a relationship with the land that we live on and from which our food comes and from which everything of ours comes, beyond resource extraction, which is the withdrawing of materials from the environment for human use. William McGeorge has a definition of solar punk that I really like. And that definition is that it's influenced by cyberpunk and steampunk. Solar punk is a speculative art movement emerging from 2010, particularly in Brazil. The genre anticipates sustainable and equitable futures, striking an ecological balance. Solar punk is also used in future studies to promote positive and sustainable futures, counteracting dystopian narratives. The solar punk field places a particular emphasis on turning ideas into action and encourages proponents to shape the futures through storytelling and speculative fiction. So, for any of us who have been following solar punk for some time, we know that there was a yogurt ad, which we will play very briefly. I took the ad that doesn't have specific mentions of the brand, but there's a link to the article that talks about the ad. So this ad, I think when people see it for the first time, they think that's what I want. That's what the future should look like. So I hope that I also have sound. I think I have sound. We'll see if I don't. Are we good with sound?
We're not sharing
No
sound.
sound. All right. I know how to fix that. Do 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 do. Share sound. Share.
You didn't want to just hum along with it. I'll hum now. Do 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 do. Join in, everyone. Do 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 do. We'll make our own elevator music. Do 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 do.
That would be really funny. There we go. And there's a lot to unpack here. There's a city, but there's also, living on the periphery of the city, farming, technology, drones, delivering things. But look at this community. Something we don't always see in conversations about urbanity or cyberpunk or the future is community necessarily.
Hannah, I don't hear you over the video sound very well.
So that's the video. Can we hear me now? Cool. Awesome. There's a conversation about, is it okay when a corporation kind of commodifies what we're talking about, solar punk, that kind of art movement? Is that okay? And I think the consensus in the community is yes, because look how many people it's brought to us. Like, look how many people have seen that ad and gotten very, very interested in what solar punk is. No, we don't need to do that again. So I'm going to hand it over to Laura here.
Before I go, Raquel has a question about, is there a relationship or a dialogue between solar punk and anime?
Oh, that's a very good question. I think that the reason that ad in particular was animated was because of all of the things that it wanted to show that don't exist yet. And animation and anime are very good for that kind of dreaming, especially when it comes to kind of science fiction type technology advances and a dream for the future. So yeah, that's a very good question.
Okay, so I'm going to go through some definitions of in the rural arena and kind of connect what we're doing at EdEon with some of these ideas that Hannah talked about. And so just so we all kind of have a common definition of rural, first to say rural is the meaning embodied in the daily experience of residents and relates to identity, perspectives, and understandings of the world. And so it's really not just a population size, it's not just proximity to a city, and it's absolutely not homogeneous. If you look at this map of the US here, the red areas show kind of where we have urban areas, and you can see that more and more we do have huge urban areas throughout our country. And as expected, the population density is higher on the East Coast, and kind of in the Midwest and West, we have some large swaths of land with very low population density. And if you look at Alaska, which of course is not down south, but up north, that's really like epitomizes the idea of kind of low population density and remoteness. And if you think of if you go into Alaska rural communities, which I have visited and been in for years when I did my graduate career. The communities there are mining communities, Native Alaskan communities, and kind of outdoor enthusiast communities. Whereas here in California, where EdEon's located, when we work with our rural communities here in Northern California, we have tall redwoods, not the boreal forest of Alaska. We don't have permafrost here, but in Alaska you have permafrost. And so the ecosystems and the people who are here, we have a lot of also native communities in Northern California as well. But we also have our logging communities and other agricultural communities, vineyards, and so any area you go, whether it's the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia or the arid areas in Texas of central Texas, with even in the hill country as they call it, or the flats of Lubbock, where you have these huge kind of windmills now. Each of those rural locations have different cultural values, different ways of communicating, different needs. But what they share is that they are remote, and the government services do require a way to kind of measure and quantify what are we saying when we say rural. Since we're federally funded here at EdEon and we work in rural areas, we really talk about the rural. We start by talking about the remoteness and low population densities of these areas. So we'll go to the next slide, Hannah. And then, so why are we talking about rural? Well, what is rural education? And the Department of Education has this nice figure kind of that helps people kind of consider, like, what are we trying to do with work in rural education? How are we trying to support those students? And, ideally a student eventually identifies where they want to go, what they want to do. They have the freedoms. And I'm going to kind of tie in some of these ideas of freedom. So, and resilience, if you're in the South, in Alabama, and you want to you realize as a young student you love astronomy and you identify that early on, then ideally there would be a way to have the coursework where you're going to get to learn some really solid math and astronomy connections to the math, astronomy connections to your science courses. Maybe there's a planetarium or amateur astronomy community in that rural area where you can go and learn more about astronomy outside of the classroom. And then you hopefully will hear about like kind of the types of places you might have to go to get the coursework, to get that astronomy content. And then, maybe you get to work at the local with amateur astronomers doing some citizen science projects, for example, counting stars or doing Eclipse Mega Movie. And so then, of course, those students would narrow their focus and decide how to get either a job right out of high school or go to college, a 2-year or 4-year education experience. And then for most of these, for a lot of these youth, they want to stay in that area with their family. There are a lot of close-knit families. They want to come back if they do leave for higher education. So the goal is for those students to have the opportunity to come back with those skills and then have a job to do in that community where they originated. And then to also grow and build their accreditation in the middle of their career. Maybe they maybe they became a physics teacher in high school with that love of astronomy. And then they wanted to they wanted to build, say, a ground station to talk to satellites in their local area. So they might have a mid-career change. So in rural education, one of the huge challenges is that most legislation concerning education policy and education funding mechanisms never mention rural schools. And instead, what they're looking for are numbers. How many students can we support with these federal dollars? But what happens is that then the rural communities can't meet those benchmarks, and they aren't open. They don't have those opportunities that the cities have because they have the kids and the seats that they can then get the federal dollars for. So if we go to the next slide, we kind of talk a little more about some of these challenges, and specifically for science, technology, engineering, math, and computing learning, which is what we focus on here at EdEon STEM Learning. So there's specific kind of challenges to teaching in rural communities around STEM+C topics. Often there's either one or no middle or high school science teacher. We've just recently been talking with schools for a program we're working with in middle schools, and the principals or administrators are saying, well, you know, our science teacher's leaving and we don't know if we'll have a high school teacher next year or who that high school teacher will or middle school teacher will be. Is that okay? And we always answer yes. So we try to answer yes to as many questions as possible. The other challenge that happens is that teachers in these rural districts, they play many different roles in their community. A lot of these teachers we work with in rural communities, they are not only the science teacher, but they're a coach for the sports. So they're working on Saturdays and after school with the students in those sports programs. In the summer, they're running either summer school or they are running informal education, so like camps for their local communities. The digital divide in these rural areas can impede students from developing digital literacy, in part because there's just insufficient funding in rural communities, or the funding that is there is for very specific industries that are relevant to that community. And just that distance, if a student does want to further their career and interest in a particular STEM+C field, to get an internship that can really provide that robust learning, the distance to that internship can be a big barrier. And that's also true for the college course dual enrollment opportunities. And you'll find also for a lot of rural community kids, they're started, you know, they spend so much time in their community, and when they leave that community to get some of these opportunities, it feels very awkward. They're not always using the language or speaking the way that others around them are speaking when they go to attend colleges or universities. Either they have other languages that they're using, or just the colloquial common either the for example, just even the accent. My dad grew up in Lubbock, Texas, which isn't technically not rural, but he said when he went to graduate school in Illinois, he got for graduate school he got teased for his accent, and that he wasn't respected because he had a Southern accent, and he spent a year getting rid of that Southern accent so that he could be respected for the scientific expertise he had. And that, I think that kind of this idea of culture can get really confusing to people, but I think it's such a broad term and very important term because we don't want to create challenges for people because of the place where they were raised and the families who were supporting them. We want them to have freedom to go and learn in the ways they want to learn. So if we go to the next slide. Oh, and I see, explain the digital divide. So, yes, you're right. So many, even in the rural areas, everyone has a cell phone. That is true. That cell phone may not always work. It may only work every once in a while. In the schools, the internet goes down often. And then the other things that they don't have access to are a lot of these types of like Arduinos and electronics boards, and the ability to really test out electrical engineering and coding in the context of science learning, for example. So all of this would be, you know, coding as a component of digital literacy. Using microprocessors as a component of digital literacy, understanding how to troubleshoot and debug, those skills also go under digital divide. And so when we say digital divide, that's a great question, Spencer, because we're not talking cell phones. Cell phones are a means to communicate with your friends, to connect with community. But in terms of critical thinking and learning skills that are going to allow you to grow and thrive in a career that requires science, technology, engineering, math, and computing, then that, you know, it does help to some degree, for sure. So we're here at EdEon. We're trying to kind of build this divide. We're kind of starting to try to bring some of these skills into middle and high school, really 8th grade and 9th grade and beyond, so that so that science teachers who are teaching science can incorporate these other skills that scientists and engineers use on a daily basis. So this ability to provide those opportunities that aren't necessarily available in a rural community because there's just one teacher teaching science, one teacher teaching STEM, there's one class. And so you have to kind of pack that class in a very efficient, effective way with these technologies so that those students can learn science really the way that science is done today. And at the same time build their computational thinking skills, their digital literacy skills, and they'll have then the skills so that they can presumably thrive in being, you know, in their interests, if those are their interests, or in just the literacy, being good citizens in terms of ability to think critically about the things around them. So let's go to the next slide, Hannah. So we're going to tie this back to solar punk.
You're muted.
Good reminder. Thank you very much. Why are we talking about an art movement in relation to like STEM education? Like it might be, you know, pretty obvious, but it also might not be so obvious. So like I said, I have a master's in English, so I'm always going to be bringing English literature and themes and that kind of stuff into everything I do because I can't help myself. But taking Toni Morrison's quote she put out a book, The Source of Self-Regard, which is a collection of essays. She says that the disquiet that writers, and I would argue artists of all kinds, raise is instructive because it is open and vulnerable, and because if unpoliced, it is threatening. There's a lot to unpack there, but also taking Juan David Reyna-Rozo's definitions of the solar punk movement and why art and technology are important for it. They write that art and technology play an essential role in the creation of other possible worlds, which is what we're trying to do. We're trying to create the world that we are talking about here. And he says that hope then can nourish the spaces of autonomy. And I think that that to us means that while it feels often that supporting rural communities can be this like huge wall to overcome, there's the funding for ourselves and for pushing those things through. There's the amount of work that's necessary, the digital divide, like we talked about, but also cultural divides to overcome. Hope is a very good vessel through which we can transcend these things. We'll get into a couple visual examples that I have about solar punk, and then we will jump right off into like discussion. We'll do a little bit of back and forth, and then following the back and forth, I think we will open it up to questions from participants. So here's some images of Singapore. Singapore is actually quite well known in the solar punk community because of the efforts to which it went. The city planners and the builders went to incorporate nature and just access to greenery into its design. So you can see these tree-like structures here, and here's a view of them from the bottom. They're actually quite large. And then they also have all kinds of, I think this is a shopping mall, if I remember correctly, which is way cool. I would love a shopping mall like that near me. I would be there constantly, and I normally really don't like malls. Here's some concept art. We have, I tried to strike a balance between what we might see in more rural environments and, here and there sprinkling in some city. So this is part of a series on Story Seed Library where they kind of put out to artists like, what would the transformation of a city look like? And I just think it's really neat. This is another city image, rooftop celebrations, but you can see, green energy in the distance, plants all over, gardens, but also growing food, technology like solar panels, greenery, walkable cities, walkways, not just freeways. Here's public transportation, lots of cool things. Another example of kind of a neighborhood, solar panels, greenery everywhere. And the greenery really, we can talk about this too, but like the heat island effect in cities that we see, adding greenery like this really helps to kind of combat the way that cities and concrete and steel structures absorb and then radiate heat. So, lots of cool stuff in terms of like green energy, but also community. And that's really what I love so much about solar punk. So we have arrived at discussion. I have some questions for Laura, and I think Laura has some questions for me.
Yes,
Do you want to start,
I want
Laura?
to start.
Okay, ask away.
So yeah, just to reiterate what Hannah said is we're going to ask each other a bunch of questions, and we hope that it's just gets you all excited to ask questions as well. And then we'll expand into our community here. So Hannah, because I really don't know, like I don't know solar punk. And so I'm for some reason I'm stuck on this word punk. I think, I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and punk, like, like in my mind, punk is like Sid Barrett, and it's like this very dark, kind of angry genre where people are kind of allowing their, I would say, lack of freedom in our society. They're really like expressing that in a very like kind of agitated way. And then I look at these pictures and I'm like, okay, well, how does putting the word solar in front of that get you here? So I'm very interested in that question.
Okay. Yeah, that's a really good question. And I'm sure a question that's on many people's. I mean, let's see if you don't mind a show of hands, how many people are not sure what punk in terms of solar punk means? You can raise your hand on the camera or, do the raise hand function. So yeah, no, a very, very good, well-timed question. I believe that what punk means is not necessarily exactly only counterculture, but it is giving yourself permission to be dissatisfied with the way things are and the way that things are almost when we talk about culture and society. This is a lot more prevalent, I think, in cities than we realize, is this kind of enforcement of a social agenda. And to be punk is to say, I'm not going to go with your social agenda. I'm going to express myself. I'm going to do what feels right. And I will convey my feelings to you, be it through art, through the way that I dress, through the music that I create, through the words that I say, I mean, we can talk about attending protests. Like, punk is very much a political statement as much as it is a culture and a response to certain cultures. So I know that in the 1950s or so, we're post World War II, we're recovering from that. There's the nuclear families, the American dream, grow up, buy a house, have a bunch of kids, get a career, get some college in you, but further the American dream, right? Well, that didn't mesh as well with everybody, and it didn't work as well either because, access to education and college and things like that was one thing in the 50s and 60s. It's a completely other thing in the 60s and 70s and 80s. So the punk is a way to kind of express yourself and let the people around you know that I don't see myself as part of that club, but let's talk about a different club. And that I think we see in cyberpunk, we see in solar punk, we see in steampunk. Punk means a veering of kind of the direction of society or culture or that kind of thing. I
Hmm.
hope that
Yeah, and I
answers the
see.
question.
Yeah, I see kind of in the chat, like James is saying, I
Hmm.
think it means revolutionary, which really relates to what you're saying. It's the same usage as steampunk, permission to be dissatisfied.
Yes, exactly.
And then Spencer, like punk was a lot of gang members. And like the American dream is too materialistic. So kind of going against that mainstream, questioning the norm. And so maybe so if I can kind of then expand, the solar presumably kind of relates then to the like clean energy and
Mhm.
using the sun in ways that humans have used the sun for since we were humans in terms of warmth and light and now we're building our technologies to kind of use those things that our skin did. And you talked about urban heat island effects. In rural communities or when you're camping, you can use those same ideas to, warm yourself or to heat an area with the sun, or to shade yourself when you need. And like you always see the cows when we're hiking in the hills of California when it's hot, they've always found the trees.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like that's kind of like the very early solar punk, the cows under the trees, and the herders. So, okay, so that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think the reason it's solar punk is perhaps I think that represents its kind of branching off point from cyberpunk. A lot of science fiction and cyberpunk actually shows utilization of solar panels and using the sun for energy as a representation of futurism too, because when you're in space and there isn't really like oil to mine, you've got solar panels probably because there's typically a star near enough you or many stars near enough to you that you can take advantage of that energy in a way that doesn't harm anything, in theory. And I am probably wrong in guessing this, but I think that solar energy and advances in solar energy were one of the first ideas for renewable forms of energy. Um,
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, we could go way far back and
yeah,
right, like there've been windmills forever in some parts of
right,
the world.
right.
And then
Yeah.
there's like there's architectural type of like if you look at a hogan in the Navajo world or in Persia, they also use kind of a hogan dome shape. So like the it's fun we have this dome here, right? It's like we as humans we've lived in domes all around the world from all cultures, and that because that there's all these like benefits to having a dome both with light, with using the sun and but also like keeping heat in the temperature consistent inside, using the kind of the temperature, like for those of us who are physicists on the call, like I think of the ground as like this big thermal like source of a constant temperature that then if you build a dome on that, you get to kind of benefit from that ground temperature, which typically on Earth is fairly comfortable. So
Hmm.
with a dome, you get to kind of keep that energy. So yeah, like we could talk about how humans have used these kind of technologies for a long time, and
Yeah.
I think I always find that when we're using new technologies, the most robust ones are ones that are building on the ancient technologies.
Hmm. Agreed. James says in the chat, solar punk to me conveys a bit more of a dynamic where we can have the technology without it being excessively pro-profit and more harmonious dynamic instead of clashing based upon what you were saying. And yeah, I agree completely, Jay. I think that that sums up like we can have the technology, but not have it be based in consumerism. it can be
Right.
based in advances for the betterment of people instead of perhaps profit, shareholder value.
Right. So it's more where, like, if we took a model where profit instead is community health, like if that were what people were striving for per, like every organization that was working towards this solar punk future, if they were working towards, say, community health,
Yeah.
as the profit, as the extra thing we're getting
Hmm.
as we do our work.
Right.
Um, Right, which requires, not only the learning of science and technology, engineering and computing, it requires then like always asking, how are we going to use this for the betterment of our community? Right.
Right.
So those two questions can't be divorced, which I think a
Hmm.
lot of scientists, we're like, we're just going to do our science and then society can decide how to use it. Right. Then, and so I kind of feel like solar punk has this nice like requirement that these things be built to get like
Yeah.
baked in almost.
Well, I have a question for you while we're on the topic. I mean, we're all, anyway. So I'm curious to see what you think about ways that rural communities, like you said, you wanted solar punk. You were thinking about solar punk. Your goal was solar punk, but you didn't have the term solar punk to put to it just yet before, I showed you a bunch of cool art. Um, do you think, and in what ways could rural communities already be like gearing up to lead this charge? Um, what have we heard? What do we think the future
Yeah.
holds for them?
I love that question. Yeah, definitely. There's some really innovative rural communities doing some super cool things. But I'll start with some of the students' comments and some of the classes of from the teachers. Some of the teachers we work with have shared some of these comments and about like when they're working with these electronic boards and getting basically what they do is they wire up these boards and they put like temperature sensors on the boards, and they turn on and off LEDs, and so that they can create logical systems whereby if you're measuring the temperature of the room, then you can turn something on like a fan to cool down the room when it gets a certain temperature. So they're learning those kind of skills. And one of the students told one of the teachers, like, after she asked, like, how could you use this in your life? And one of the kids said, well, then when my dad's asking me to go out and like close the gate to the barn, I could just have an automatic gate closer. Like I could, like at 5 o'clock, I could have a timer, or I could, code my computer that at 5 o'clock it turns off, it closes the gate for me and I don't have to stop playing my video games. So that was one of the comments that the student had. And then I know, well, they're kids. What else do they want to do? And then I also saw this really cool, like, I was way early on with Google. They had this pretty kind of cool commercial where this rural African, I forget in what country in Africa, I think it was maybe in Egypt, but he was living out in the rural areas and he was trying to figure out how to have light in there. They had just like a very small, tiny room for a hospital where women would come and give birth, and they really needed some light for the nighttime births, birthing. And so they like on this ad for, I think it was a Google ad, they like Googled like how to set up a solar panel, and so that they could have a solar panel battery light system in their kind of one room hospital where people came because they didn't have electricity out to their village. And so they set up an electric, they set it up so that they had their battery and their solar panel, and they were able to bring light into this room so that they could care for people in this remote village of Africa. And I just like all these little kind of conversations with our work, and then just seeing how rural communities are starting to take these technologies and make them useful for what they need and want in their own cultural contexts. It's just been really cool to see. And then also just on the opposite side, I was talking to my sister lives, she's a dentist in rural Kansas, like no middle of nowhere. It takes 4 hours, maybe longer, 6 hours from Denver or 6 hours from Kansas City to get there in a car. And it's like population 300 people. Then you can go, 45 minutes to the next biggest city, which is like 1,500 people. Like there's a lot of cattle. And I said, maybe I kind of told her the story about, setting up like teaching some of the students in her small town about, electronics and computational thinking. And she's like, why would we do that? We're fine. We don't need that. And so then it was like, yeah, you might be right. Like you all are doing great, So she couldn't see a reason for having that technology. So that's the other thing I love about solar punk. Like it helps that imagination, right? Like, oh, what if we want some of those students to then go to Denver for a day? We could get them in that flying bus that we saw in the yogurt commercial, right? Like maybe there's a way to get them and then have them come back. But she, I doubt she's older than I am. Like I don't think she's not looking at solar punk, I can tell you. So, but now I'm going to show her.
I think too that some people are dreamers and some people are very grounded in their day-to-day reality, and that's enough for them. But some of us are not content with that. And we want to continue to see what we can do, what we can dream, what we can say to perhaps improve things for everyone involved. I see Nick's hand. I'm going to ask Laura for a definition of something really quick, and then I think we will jump to Nick's question. Laura, you've said a couple times computational thinking. This is something that we wrote into the proposal for STEM ACEs. This is something that Laura, in the preparation for writing that proposal to the Department of Education for this work, dove into. And it is kind of a movement in education these days. So please, for those of us who can't remember what or don't know
Yeah.
yet, what is computational thinking? And why are we teaching it? Why are we emphasizing it?
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much for asking that question. So computational thinking, and for most people think immediately of computers and like coding computers to do things, which is a part of computational thinking. In science, computational thinking also includes the thinking about how to put together basically the engineering required to put together the science experiment that you're going to do. So there's an iterative approach to getting to a setup that will take the kind of data that you need to answer a science question. And that requires thinking through step by step, what kind of data do you need? What does that mean for setup? How is that going to be run robustly? Will it run remotely? Will it run in the area that you're taking the information? Will you be measuring it from afar? So thinking through all those processes also is part of computational thinking. So you can kind of think of it as like executive functioning in the context of science. And then once you get your data, there's what are you going to do with that data to actually answer your question? So you have to take the data. Sometimes you have to make it, data, you have to make sure that all the data points are comparable to one another, which you use this thing called calibration to do. And so that all the techniques for getting your data calibrated requires computational thinking. And you can use computers to do that now because we have computers to help us in that way. And even if we're like asking AI to do these things for us, we need to be able to think computationally to ensure that AI is doing what we're asking it to do in the way it needs to do it. So it's really, this idea of computational thinking is much bigger than just coming up with an algorithm for coding some code in a program. All
If
right.
I can
Yeah.
summarize really quick,
Summarize.
it sounds like we as a people do not yet consider or think about naturally the work that computers can do to help us every day. And part of computational thinking is really bringing into consideration every step, every part of the process that a computer can help us achieve results. And in order to do that, we need to know more about how computers work.
Yeah, although you don't even need a computer for computational thinking
That is very
because
true.
yeah, it's more about the steps and the order of the steps that you are, so it's about the thinking process that you are going to have something, whether it's a
Ah,
computer or a system or a clock or like it could be any system, it could be a human system. So the
mhm,
computational thinking is, thinking computationally about how those things, the parts of the system work together to get to what you want to get to.
mhm.
And so it doesn't even require a computer.
Cool. Okay, I think we're finally ready for Nick's question, and then we'll answer Raquel's question after Nick's question, if that sounds good.
You want
And
to do, since Raquel's question is relevant to the discussion, you want to do that first?
sure, sure. So Raquel asks, how is computational thinking other than logical reasoning?
They're
What's the
related for
difference?
sure. Logical reasoning is definitely, um, yeah, there's a lot of overlap for that. I think that computational thinking does ultimately relate to quantification, whereas logical reasoning doesn't always. So, but there's a lot of overlap, and there's so much research being done about computational thinking in education and in research and in science. So it's kind of an ongoing discussion that you could add to.
Cool. Does that answer your question, Raquel?
I think
And
so. It was and I did mean logic in a formal sense. I think people often use
Mhm.
the word to say logical as if just to insult people, but you know, rather than it being formal. Like I've never had a formal logic class, right?
Mhm.
There is a technical definition to what logical reasoning is. And so
Mm,
that's where I have been thinking more of what is it to write, and Nick wrote procedural, or somebody, yeah, procedural thinking in there. And I was like, oh, yeah, where does that fit? So it's just an interesting that breaking things apart in a way that people can, that something, because we're good at the sloppy part. I'm a biologist, right? So all the mushy stuff that you don't need to like make in a straight line works for me. Whereas procedural or writing instruction and code, that's a different skill set. Um,
There's a piece of engineering that isn't just logic. It's also then, yeah, I can get it over here, but then I have a little bit of slip. There's this error, there's this margin of error that I need to account for, and then I need to like actually take the thing that I got over here, whether it's a computational result or a device, and I need to get it over here where I'm going to use it, right? And so that feels like a little bit more about what I'm looking at Laura as if she can see me looking at her. But that feels, Laura, that feels more like what you're describing is this just here are there's the theory, which is the logic and but then there's a like actual, okay, now I have to actually make this happen.
Yeah, I think also the reason, like, there's a question, why are we even like talking about computational thinking? And it really, the reason we're breaking it down is because as teachers have to, one, we have to say, well, what is it that we want these students to be able to come away with, right? What's the learning goal here? Why are we even talking about it? So we have to break it down into, as scientists, we do this, and we want students to be able to do some aspect of it. And so it really comes in kind of the context of science and engineering, of what it is that scientists and engineers do, and then how can teachers help students do those things? And then how do we assess that the students walk away with the thinking skills? So it's all good and fine if they do it, but how do we then assess whether they actually thought through those procedures correctly to get to where they need to go? And how can they walk out of the classroom and use that when they need to?
Mhm.
Uh, so that's
James
how,
asks, is
yeah.
it teaching kids how to learn a bit more?
Yeah, it's teaching kids how to learn how to use quantitative thinking
Hmm,
to do science.
cool.
Yeah. And I don't know if David, your question's kind of in the same realm. I think Nick's going to take us to another
I'll defer to Dave.
dimension of our conversation, which is great.
Well, I might also take us to another dimension. I don't know. This is wonderful, by the way. I'm so glad. Wow, what an interesting conversation to be having at the Freedom Fest. I've been to a few of the other events, and this is, well, they're all sort of different. So I take that back.
They're all very different.
I'm a musician who has taken logic and studied topology. So I mix up a lot of stuff. So Laura, I want to make a friendly correction. I
Oh,
think
good.
you meant Sid Vicious in punk.
Oh
Sid
my gosh, I
Barrett is the
did mean
founder of
Sid
Pink
Vicious.
Floyd.
Thank you so much.
Sid Barrett is the founder of Pink Floyd, who got way too into LSD
Yeah.
and actually is
Pink Floyd's great too,
song
though.
I Wish You Were Here is about him.
Right. And I love Pink Floyd so much. So I'm I was more a Pink Floyd person than a punk person. So of course I said Sid.
Well,
Right.
me
But
too,
yes, I
which
did mean Sid Vicious. Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank
I
you.
was more of a Pink Floyd person than a punk person, which did not serve me well in the Manhattan rock scene in the late 70s. But that's another story. Um, here is this. I'm going to try to make this a question, but this is part of what I've been thinking about, because this focus on rural, where solar punk seems to be going, which I'm really intrigued by, and brings in what's sometimes called indigenous knowledges or indigenous science. But methodologically, much, and it varies from culture to culture. So I don't want to make everybody non-Western in the same bucket, right? But say, take a look at the native peoples in North America, right? But also native people, they deal a lot with spirit and magic, as well as they know how to keep a forest up by burning it at the right times, right? And I'm a kind of fan of the public philosopher Charles Eisenstein, who seeks to bring together the ancient and the new, right? Stuff that's most humane about, say, what the outgrowth of the Enlightenment methodologically, right? With these indigenous activities and knowledges, right? And I heard a fascinating podcast that he did some years ago with Dr. Zach Bush, who posited a whole different methodology for medical science. And I realized that, wow, if we really could create environments where there was kind of open exploratory conversation among people who are practitioners of indigenous practices with hardcore scientists, it would seem to me we would evolve a whole, like a hybrid methodology, if you will, right? So I'm thinking that, and then I was also thinking during the course of this, and both of you mentioned speculative fiction,
Mhm.
right? And there's a person around the East Side Institute named Stephen Licardi who writes speculative fiction, is also a poet and a therapist. And he's doing a workshop soon, so I'm gonna check out what he has to say about this. He's all about reimagining and imagining, but he says that speculative fiction at its best performs a new future. Not imagines or writes, it does that too, but performs a new future. And I'm thinking that's like bringing hardcore scientists and indigenous spirit leaders together, right? Might be a very interesting performance of a new future that would not, for instance, privilege urbanity, which the current culture does, clearly.
Right.
So I'm going to stop there and just wanted to hear what folks' thoughts were on this.
I will jump in really quick and just say that I've been digging in a lot to Ursula Le Guin and her fiction and her essays, especially because just her as a writer and notoriously her father was an anthropologist at Berkeley, so a lot of her writing carries that culture and the bodies of knowledge in ways that I'm sure Laura is very excited to talk about with indigenous cultures. And I think that she would agree with that assessment of science fiction or speculative fiction to an extent. I think that she believes it is more along the lines of thought experiment, and she kind of really all I want to say about Ursula Le Guin in this sense is that she wants to caution us to read science fiction as a prediction of the future, and instead encourages us to pick and choose what we like about it and make that future happen. So I think that goes with what you're saying ultimately. But yeah, I wanted to, shout out to Ursula Le Guin, one of my just phenomenal author. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm just going to, I put a link it's basically a final report from an NSF project that I was a co-principal investigator on. And we did almost what you're describing. We brought scientists and indigenous peoples and also science educators in museums, and also tribal museum educators from tribal museums. And we had week-long conversations. And this book kind of tells you about those. So, yes, it's called Cosmic Serpent, and Nancy Maryboy and David Begay were really the leaders on that. I was a co-investigator, so I was collaborating with integrity with them, but they really were the ones who brought all the I mean, we work together, but their Indigenous Education Institute's kind of the foundation of that. So I direct you to them because they are amazing, and I have such respect for their work. And we do have physical copies if anyone would like one. And I do want to hear Nick's question.
Yes, Nick has been very patient. Thank you, Nick.
Thanks, Nick. And we can come back to these ideas, but I love this idea too of these speculative fiction, like being like our ideas are a reality. They are a truth. They are something that is tangible. It it exists. And that it goes, there's some physics theories that people are trying to actually model that about information being like a quantitative thing in the universe that we can't ignore, that I think kind of goes to that. But that's another conversation. Nick, what's your contribution here?
So I was just thinking about this, going back to the discussion about, or the my interjection about the teacher and loading up the teacher with right, and like there is a and I think this is part of what your sort of long-term vision is with training the student. So there's a problem of getting the expertise into the rural communities. right? And making that available so that, the dentist that's in the town of 300, who then is also maybe even servicing the town of 1500 that's, 40 miles away, like how do you, I can't imagine being like a middle school or high school science still. Like I had a physics teacher, I had a biology teacher, I had a chemistry teacher, right? And now you've got a science teacher who's got to do one day they're doing they're coding up an Arduino, and the next day they're doing a field study in sampling water. It's like, you know where how do you pack all that expertise? You need you need the little cyberpunk module that you pop out of the back of your neck and put it in that module, right? Johnny Mnemonic style. Um, and
Oh,
so
Johnny
is there
Mnemonic.
so I guess that's my question or study or struggle, right? Is how do we get that back into these communities in such a way that it's accessible to as many people as possible? And is that part of the what you're saying about training students, bringing them, maybe to the universities and working with them and then sending them back home?
Right. Well, that's a great question. Actually, our program, so there's been research that shows that if you want to improve student learning in science, the three components that you need to provide is science, professional learning for the teachers. So the teachers need that professional learning, like the week-long summer institutes kind of thing.
And
They
that's content knowledge you're talking about.
Yeah, and pedagogical knowledge.
Okay.
Yeah, all of it. And then the students need to be doing hands-on standard-based because the standards are now, really lab-based science and engineering practices. So they're really robust. So if students are implementing hands-on activities in their science classes that involve engineering and science labs, and then those teachers are supported throughout the year by coaches or local folks. Their students improve science test scores. So we're seeing how can we take that research that was done in urban areas and modify it for the rural communities. And so we're bringing these hands-on engineering activities into science classes for middle school teachers, and we're teaching the teachers, and then they take these engineering activities, they develop their science kind of modules with our tools, and then they go into the classroom and they teach them, and we provide support for them for the whole year. So we're also building coaches within their rural communities. There's always that kid or adult who just loves the science and is tinkering and doing the thing. And so we're trying to find those people to come in and support as coaches on the side. And then there's always some really amazing pedagogy teachers who know their pedagogy so well, or who know their science really well. So I think the secret sauce is going to be just acknowledging people's expertise. They're in the rural community, and having them come in and using that expertise in these classrooms or in the community in some way. Our program right now is just to get the hands-on pieces, assuming the standards are in the classroom already, and support those teachers and provide training. But it's a question. And we're trying some things in California, Texas, but yeah.
As
Yeah.
so, sort of getting back to the digital divide question, right? How much of this can be done with a remote setting so that you're doing the PD maybe remotely, or some of the PD remotely, or providing, but and then is there a problem as they strip out, support for doing high-speed internet in Louisiana? Is there a problem with getting bandwidth for that?
Yeah, the answer is yes. The nice thing about our work is that we've been funded to come up with solutions to that. So like our web app works without internet when the internet goes out. And also we have asynchronous trainings, so it gets recorded. So you just have to be able to get enough internet to download the video and then watch it. And then you can like do the work while you're watching the video. And then we just have to know that we can pay the teachers. But these, yes, so all those are barriers for sure. And that's also why finding, the folks in the area who can put up more bandwidth, who are ham radio operators, who like know how to get signals of very, there's internet ham, that's a thing. You can, through the ham radio, you can get internet. Pat Rife, some of our colleagues at Rice University knows all about that. So there's all sorts of that, like the solutions are out there. It's just us connecting each other. And I think that goes back to freedom and right, like there's always barriers, but there's always solutions. And I think this is where solar punk is so great, because just like Hannah was saying, solar punk infuses hope. Like none of this, like getting over barriers without hope is almost
Community.
impossible. Right? Like that hope pulls us forward to ask, where can we go to solve this problem? We want this vision. How can we make it happen? So I think it kind of brings us back to infusing. And of course, how do you keep hope alive? You allow people to have, like, you don't even allow it. You just support people embracing their culture. If you don't say, because you believe in a God, you can't do science. I mean, someone said that to someone at UC Berkeley when I was there once. I was like, okay, that's opposite of what we're trying to do. Don't do that. Like, be you and do these things. So I think the more we can support each other in being whole, keeping our whole selves and finding solutions and realizing we all have such amazing expertise, and it's in different realms, but we need all those realms. And that's where solar punk is so beautiful. It like embodies the realms.
Yes. And I've started sharing my screen again, so I probably took over everyone's screen. I just wanted to make sure that we saw this slide really quick. This has some information for how to get in touch with me if you want things like more information about rural education and the work that we're doing, or a copy of these slides so that you can get to all the really pretty, really amazing art. Or, if you would like a physical copy of the serpent book that we were just talking about, or if you are doing something in the classroom and you want to talk to us about it, I want to work with teachers and I want to work with educators, and very regularly we publish articles and magazines and things like that. So we need perspectives, and we work very closely with our teachers in the classroom, and we will be recruiting again very soon for our second phase of a study. We're basically going and working with WestEd, a large organization that is basically the best at what it does, to study the efficacy of everything we've talked about today in terms of our intervention in rural classrooms and things like that. So if you know 8th grade science teachers in, preferably rural areas, but we can talk about exceptions to the rule for our work in our study. If you know any 8th grade science teachers that feel like something hands-on interactive is missing in their classroom, set us up. Send me an email with their contact information, or send them my contact information. We would really, really, really love to talk to them. And you. So here is my contact information, and then just a couple other slides in here so you know what you're getting if you do request a copy of the slides. Some rural education resources, a National Academies report that came out very recently that is very up to date, very concise, full of great information about rural education, STEM education specifically. A book, for example, called Cultivating Rural Education that Laura is currently reading and shared some stuff with me, and it is quite well written and concise and very meaningful, and actually went to the effort of seeing what rurality is all about. We have some more solar punk resources, links to pages, links to written articles about what solar punk is, what it can be, what we want it to be, that kind of thing, and some examples of STEM+C in rural jobs. So I think, yeah, please feel free. Discord, if you use Discord, or email is great too. Reach out to me or drop your email in the chat and I will send you an email and start the conversation. I'm also happy to do that. With that, I think I will stop sharing and turn it over to Raquel and Laura, really, just to say thank you so much for this opportunity. It was Laura's idea to talk about solar punk today. I'm really glad that she was like, hey, do you want to do this? Because I really have enjoyed myself. And as I'm sure any book nerd knows, anytime you get to talk about something that you really love in terms of fiction and literature and genre is a very, very good day. Mr. Eric Sully, I see your email. And Sherilyn, I see your email. I will be reaching out to you. So to Laura for a last statement and then Raquel to close us out.
All right. Well, thank you, Hannah, for your inspiring conversations with me all the time, and just the Hannah really worked hard on putting all this together for us today, and I was so grateful because I did so little. And then I just got to talk about what I think. And she did such a lovely job on the solar punk and even helping me kind of summarize these papers. She's super fast in reading and summarizing and so accurate. And didn't you love her summary? I loved her summary. I loved your summary, Hannah. So awesome summarizing. Yes, I couldn't say it any better. And I agree with everything Hannah said. And I'm so glad you all were here, old friends and new. And with that, I turn it over to Raquel.
Awesome. Thank you. Wasn't this an exciting session? So informative, like just lovely. And I think it's that expression of what we can create and learn when we're bringing as scientists what we care about as human beings, what we're caring about, and inviting each other into conversation. Thank you so much for being part of the Freedom Festival. Laura worked really hard. I was like, do something with the Freedom Festival. She's like, what can I do? It's got to be EdEon. It's got to bring out what we think about, what we care about. And so that very working on what is the relationship is both growthful for ourselves even before the session happens, and then we get to enjoy it all together. I'm going to tell you something about the links that I believe I just put in the chat. One is freedomfestivalusa.org. There are 8 more days of programming taking place that are like this. People just talking about things they care about. I highlighted one tomorrow, which is, later today, in just an hour and a half, is on law enforcement accountability, a local effort in Sonoma County. Again, this will be accessible via the website. Anime tomorrow, so we can ask that question again of what does anime look like in relation to solar punk, and then Field and Stars. Laura, you spoke so much about the relationship of rural education and access and what it means to be able to participate in a technical world. And Hakeem Olusheyi is going to be speaking with us in this same kind of format on July 2nd. And so he is the CEO of the Astronomical Society of the Pacific. He trained at Stanford and at Tougaloo and has created some of the groundbreaking I'm going to say telescope because but lenses that have gone into solar research. So don't miss it. And cultivating ensembles I put in there because if you like this conversation, which is the science and arts and where we live and think about the social issues going on, the Cultivating Ensembles conference that takes place July 24th to 26th in New Jersey is something you want to check out. And Hannah will be there in person, as well as myself and Nick and maybe some others. Anyway, we have lots to give. Your presence and your time has been fabulous. A gift, I know, to Laura and Hannah and the Freedom Festival. Grassroots organizing, grassroots building, donate, so we can continue to give away free programs like this. and have a fabulous rest of your day. Thanks for being here.
Thanks,
Thank you
everyone.
so much, everybody. This was so much fun. Thank you for all the amazing questions and the, humoring me and listening to a book nerd talk about literary genres, and listening to scientists talk about stuff scientists is really passionate about. So it has been a blast.
I agree. I agree.
Ooh, sign up for the newsletter
Thanks,
for
everyone.
announcements. Yay!